Now, as most of you look at the title, you can tell it's a little different. We've been talking about loving one another, but over the past 2 weeks, I've written 3 lessons, and I've hated all of them and thrown them away. And so I started to write another one and thought, I just need a break from one another for just a little bit. Okay, that sounds bad. I'm not tired of all of you, but I need a break from the lesson series one another for just a little bit. So we're going to take a little different direction today. And I want us to start by asking one question. What are you looking for today? What are you looking for today? There's a story of a man who went to church one Sunday. And when the song leader missed a note, he frowned. He gave a mean stare at 2 teenagers who were talking when the congregation was in prayer. During the scripture readings, he kept looking impatiently at his watch, waiting for them to be over. When the collection basket was passed, he felt like those who were passing it were watching him to try to figure out how much money he was giving. During the sermon, he felt pleased when he caught the preacher slip up with his tongue. He was tight-lipped during all of the singing, and as he slipped out the side door after services, he said, "That was terrible. What a bunch of clods. Never again." Another man went to church one Sunday. He was edified by the song leader's rendition of Amazing Grace. He marveled at the sight of a father exchanging hugs with his young child on his shoulder. He had one thought when the collection basket was passed. He said, "Some of what I give will be used to serve the needy. I wonder if I'm giving enough." He listened attentively to the scripture readings, which spoke of God's incredible love for the human family. He heard something in the sermon that helped him with a question that had bothered him for a long time. He enthusiastically joined in the congregational singing. And as he left the church, do you know what he said to himself? He said, "How good it is to be here and to share in the experience of the presence of God." Both of these men went to the same church on the same Sunday, but they left feeling completely different. Could it be, though, I wonder if the experience was so different because each of these men got exactly what they were looking for? One came in looking to find fault. One came in looking to praise and honor God. So I ask you this morning, what are you looking for? Because I am pretty sure that whatever we're looking for is what we're going to find. If we're searching for a deeper relationship with God, I am convinced that you will find it. But if we're searching for fault, I'm also convinced that you'll find that. Through the years, we've had a lot of people who walk in the door who say, "I love God and I hate religion. I hate church." I'm sure as we look around at each other, as we look around at the church, we can find problems with each other, can't we? We can find decisions that we don't agree with. We can find people that frustrate us, problems that are going on, but despite all of those things, the church is something that we should love. And when I say the church, I don't mean the sign out front that says Church of Christ. I mean the gathering together of Christians. It's something we should love. When we talk about the church, and when we talk about loving the church, I want us to notice how deep our love should be. The Bible says in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25, "Husbands, love your wives even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her." Christ loved the church enough that he was willing to give himself up for it. And although this verse is talking about how much as husbands we are supposed to love our wives, it also shows us how deep Christ's love was for the church. He was willing to give himself up. He was willing to die for the church. If Jesus loved the church enough to sacrifice his own life for it, how much should we love the church? Jesus loved us so much that he viewed his life as nothing in comparison to the souls of those who are here today. That's fascinating to me. And a lot of times when we think about loving the church, we say, well, I could love it if the leaders would make better decisions, if they would listen to me, if there weren't so many people who were in sin, and we have a long conditional list of things that we have to have happen for us to love the church. Now, I know that the church probably means a lot to us here today. And I think a lot of the problems, though, that we have with the church is that we have a tendency to fail to see all of the good things that the church offers. And my goal for us today is to once again fall in love with the bride of Christ. You know, the church is called the bride of Christ. And for me, thinking about the church in that way, not just saying the word church, but saying the bride of Christ, it's a subtle difference, but for me it changes the way that I look at the church. Today I want us to look beyond the words. I want us to look beyond the problems, look beyond the frustrations, and I want us to see the church in the way that Christ sees the church. Because I believe today that when we truly begin to love the church, that it changes the way that we interact with the church. It changes the way that we participate as a group. It changes our motives and it changes our motivations in life. And it changes our priorities. You know, I mentioned that Ennis was with Ellen in the hospital. But I love this morning, I just want to read you something. Even though he's doing the right thing, even though he's where he should be this morning, do you know where he wants to be? He wants to be here with us. And here's what he said. He said, I dislike missing church, and we are thankful to God for hearing us and knowing our problems and struggles. To all of you, have a blessed service. Even though he's sitting with his wife, he's thinking about us. It's the church. And I'm convinced that when we think about the bride of Christ in the right way, that it changes all of these things. You know, we can talk all day about what God expects of us. We can talk all day about what we should be doing as members of the congregation. But until the people, us, that make up the church, love the church, and stand behind the mission of the church, nothing is going to change. I could come today and I could say, we're going to have another outreach and we're going to do this. Will that motivate you to come? No. What motivates you to get involved in the lives of one another? What motivates you to go out and talk to people about Christ? I think it's when we recognize and understand that the church is the bride of Christ. When we remember how much he loved the church. Now, there are a lot of people, Christians and non-Christians, who do not love the bride of Christ. They show it by rarely attending, by rarely giving, by rarely doing any real work to advance the cause of the church. We can say that we love the church, but if we love the church, if we love the bride of Christ, it should show in our daily lives. We all understand that there's a big difference between saying we love something and actually caring enough to make a difference, right? I say, I want to lose weight, right? How many of us here are in that, wait, don't put your arms up. How many of us are here in that weight loss challenge? I think we've talked as a group, and the only way that whoever wins is going to win by gaining the least amount of weight. I'm not sure, other than Jay, there's anybody who's actually lost weight. Now, I say I don't want to be fat, right? I say I want to lose weight. But do I want to enough to do anything about it? I thought so, but apparently not. When we say, I love the church, is that demonstrated by our actions? You know, it's sad, but church attendance is a problem everywhere. And it's so much of a problem that there are actually lots of jokes out there about it. And I love this one. There was a group of 3 preachers who got together for coffee one day, and they found that all of their churches had really bad problems with bat infestations. One of them said, I got so mad, I took a shotgun and fired at them. It made holes in the ceiling but did nothing to the bats. Another said, I tried trapping them alive. I drove them 50 miles away, but they beat me back to the church building. The third said his bat problem was gone. He had it figured out. And the others were just perplexed. And they said, well, what did you do? And he said, I baptized them and they never came back. We say we love the church, right? But what does that look like? When we love the church, we don't have to be motivated. We don't have to be manipulated. We don't have to be coerced. Because we wouldn't think of being anywhere else. We already started reading from Ephesians 5. Let's keep reading. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Verse 26. That he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. That he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Verse 29. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. We know that we are to love the church. But why? Number one, we love the church because Christ loved the church. When we love someone, we have a tendency to love the same kinds of things that they do. That's why family heirlooms are so treasured and so valued. I'm sure that most of you probably have an heirloom that has been passed down from generation to generation. And if someone else were to see it, they might throw it away because it doesn't hold value to them. But it holds value to you because people that you love, loved it. Christ loved the church. Christ demonstrated his love for the church. Even if we didn't understand the church, even if we didn't understand the blessings that the church holds for us, we love it because we love him. And he loves it. You know, this is a horrible illustration. I probably shouldn't say it out loud. But all of you know how I feel about dogs. But when Pete, our neighbor Pete, was across the street, he knew exactly how I felt about dogs. But when he went on vacation, guess who he called to come and feed his dog? Now, if it was my dog, I wouldn't feed the thing, except to a coyote. But because I love Pete, I take care of his dogs. Even though I don't care for them, I take care of them. And I know that's a bad illustration, but I want us to think about it for a moment. Even if we don't really understand the church right now, even if we're not sure how we feel about the church, the question is, do you love Jesus? And if the answer is yes to that, then we love the church because we love him. Now remember, when we're talking about a church, we're not talking about the physical building. We're not talking about a building that has a name on it. We're talking about the people who are saved. And I think that makes a difference, doesn't it? Let's notice what John chapter 13 says. A new command I give to you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, this command was not necessarily a new command, but it was a new way of looking at an older command. The idea of loving your neighbor was a principle that God had taught from the very beginning. But the depth of the command changed. It was new because we have been commanded to love as Christ loves. His love is far-reaching. His love is deep. It is unconditional. It is sacrificial. And for most of us, that is a new way to love. Jesus demonstrated that love when he looked at his church. Not only does God, though, promise to provide for our physical bodies, he also promises to nourish and take care of those who make up the church. Notice what Ephesians 5:29 says. For no one has ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. Doesn't it seem like all too often these days we hear or we read stories of a parent who says they love their child, but then they do horrible, horrible things to them? What's going on in a parent's mind that would cause them, number one, to not love their child, but number two, to say they love them, but express that love in horrific ways? The church is dependent upon Christ for its spiritual nourishment. He takes care of the church. But his care doesn't end there. The Bible tells us that when he hurts, or that when we hurt, he hurts as well. God has always taken it personally when his people are mistreated. God has always taken it personally when we, as his children, are hurt. Do you remember what happened to the Apostle Paul when he encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus? Now remember, Paul at this point was not a Christian. Paul had been persecuting the church. And one day he was stopped dead in his tracks with this voice. And falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I'm sure you've noticed this before. But do you notice he didn't say, why are you persecuting the church? Jesus had already ascended to heaven. Paul was not persecuting him personally, but he was persecuting the church. And so when someone was persecuting the church, it was the same as if they were persecuting Jesus himself. When Jesus' people are hurt, when we are hurt, it hurts him. When we are heartbroken, when we are stressed, when we are struggling in life, when we are offended, when we are mistreated, it hurts him. He doesn't just leave us alone and not care for us. He doesn't just allow us to hurt on our own. He hurts for us. What that really means is he loves us each individually. There's no other organization on the planet that offers that kind of relationship with the head of the organization. No one else. Finally, Jesus is the head of the church. Some people have a tendency these days to say, I love Jesus, but I hate the church. I understand what they're trying to say, but you can't say that. If you don't love the church, you don't love Jesus. And I know that sounds strong, but if you do not love the church, you don't love Jesus. At least not the way he intended you to love him. It's like severing a head from a body. It doesn't work. Remember Colossians chapter 1 and verse 18. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. I really love how Dan Bernard illustrates the concept of Jesus being the head of the church. He says, remember putting your face above a headless frame that was painted to represent a muscle man or a clown or even a bathing beauty. Many of us have taken our pictures in this way. And the photos are humorous because the head does not represent the body. If we could take a picture of our local body of believers with Christ as the head, what would the world say? Would they look at that picture and laugh at the misfit difference between the head and the body? Or would they look at that picture in awe, seeing how the head of Christ fits perfectly with his body? I love that illustration. And I hope that we can be that kind of church. And I think if we talk about it, if we think about it, and if we all work that way, we will be. But there's a tendency to be a different kind of church. You all know the song, Onward Christian Soldiers. And I'm sure as I say that, it's going through your brain right now. You're probably humming the tune inside. There's a different version, though, that is sad. It's a little humorous, but it's sad. The tendency is to always, I think, go that direction toward this other song. But if we work hard, I think we can not go that way. But I want us to think about it. It's titled Backward Christian Soldiers, and it was written by an anonymous person. It's going to be hard for me to not try to sing this song in my brain as I speak it. Backward Christian soldiers fleeing from the fight, with the cross of Jesus nearly out of sight. Christ, our rightful master, stands against the foe. Onward into battle, we seem afraid to go. Backward Christian soldiers fleeing from the fight, with the cross of Jesus nearly out of sight. Like a mighty tortoise moves the church of God. Brothers, we are treading where we've often trod. We are much divided, many bodies we, having different doctrines, but not much clarity. Backward Christian soldiers fleeing from the fight, with the cross of Jesus nearly out of sight. Crowns and thorns may perish, kingdoms rise and wane, but the cross of Jesus hidden does remain. Gates of hell should never against the church prevail. We have Christ's own promise, but we think it might fail. Backward Christian soldiers fleeing from the fight, with the cross of Jesus nearly out of sight. Last verse. Sit here then, ye people, join our sleeping throng. Blend with ours your voices in a feeble song. Blessings, ease, and comfort asked from Christ the King. But with our modern thinking, we won't do a thing. Backward Christian soldiers fleeing from the fight, with the cross of Jesus nearly out of sight. It is so easy for us to become complacent. It is so easy for us to slide into this kind of thinking without ever even recognizing we're there. But Christ loved the church enough to give his life for it. And so when someone asks you, what do you think about the church? I hope that you love it. Even recognizing that there are things that we need to work through. There are things that we need to work out as a group. Christ loves us, and he loves the church. When we look beyond the problems, when we look beyond any frustrations that we might have with one another, we see the church. We see the bride of Christ and its glory. And when we start to truly and sincerely love the church, I am confident today that it will change the way that we interact with the church. It will change the way that we participate, not only in the church, but with one another. It changes our motivations, and finally it changes our priorities. So I'll ask the same question that we started with. How do you see the church? Why are you here? This week, think about these questions. Ask yourself, when you think about the church, what is it you see? What is it you think of? When the church is hurting, when there are problems, are you hurting as well? And then probably the most difficult is, what are you willing to do to make the church better? You know, we've read that statistic before, but I think it's an important one. They say that if 2% of a group are dedicated toward a cause, they can move the whole group in their direction. And what that means for us is we're a small group. We have probably around 50 here this morning. So what that means, if there is one person here who is strongly dedicated, willing to do anything for the church, then your dedication can move everybody along with you. Imagine now that we don't have one person, but we have 2. We have 5. We have 10. Can you imagine the difference that makes? Christ loved the church enough that he was willing to give himself for her. How much do you love the church today? We never want to close without offering an invitation. If there's someone here who has never given your life over to Christ, or if you have but you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters, please come forward as we stand and sing number 902. Number 902.